We are one race down in 2023. It seems like an awful lot more to go, but from our first race in Bahrain, there were so many storylines to break down, and one I think caught the attention of many was that of Fernando Alonso. Welcome back everyone to Racing Reviews. If you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. If you are returning from our big hiatus in 2022, we are back for 2023. But Bahrain was a middle-of-the-road race. It was a race where we had a runaway leader, Max Verstappen, dominant in the opening round of the season. Mercedes looking like they've got a car that still isn't quite going to challenge for the title. Ferrari, a little bit of no man's land, with Carlos Sainz not on the level of Charles Leclerc in terms of race pace, and Charles not quite being able to take the fight to the Red Bulls. And then, of course, Ferrari reliability not being at its best in Bahrain. But Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll really were those unexpected stars of our first race of the season. And it's what I'd like to talk about today. Because here, a team that has changed so much, that have been through so much in the last 3 or 4 seasons, it seems like something's brewing, something's cooking in 2023. And to get a podium in the opening round through pace, yes, of course, Charles Leclerc retired through a mechanical failure and would have finished third if not for that mistake. But I still feel like Alonso and the pace he had and the management he had on that middle phase of the Grand Prix, the late phase of the race where he kind of, once he got past Sainz and Hamilton, just coasted to P3, and also in the early stage where he wasn't quite able to work his way through the Mercedes as quickly as he would have liked to. Take those out of the equation, and do Aston Martin really have a good chance at P2 this year in the championship? It's what I want to talk about today. So, if you are new, feel free to subscribe. It's a very different looking Racing Reviews. But let's get into it. Because Fernando Alonso, a 2-time Formula 1 world champion, he knows how to drive. He knows how to put in a performance, and it's what we saw in Bahrain. 2 magical moves to overtake Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. He also had a few fights with George Russell earlier in the Grand Prix as well, who at this stage of his career is certainly no mean feat. But Fernando, who's had an Alpine car for the last 2 years that has been okay, been in the midfield, so he's definitely had to get his elbows out. But he's not been in a position realistically where he's been fighting for podiums, fighting for victories. And though he had that podium in Qatar a couple of years ago, it wasn't quite the same as last weekend. Because last weekend, he wasn't in a position where there were 4 or 5 cars out of the running. He wasn't in a position where his qualifying was that good that he was going to be able to fend off other cars if they came his way. He wasn't defending last time out, he was attacking. And this Aston Martin looks okay in qualifying trim, Q1 and Q2. It looked like he would be in the mix for pole position. But it was when it came to the race, it was in that second stint where the Aston really came alive, and that third stint where he was just able to take those tyres so much longer than everyone else in the second stint. And in the third stint, when I was just mentioning, he was able to use that tyre life to his advantage and come away with a really comfortable third place. Again, it's hard to tell, and it is only race 1. It is such early doors, but it was comfortable. And that's something where Max Verstappen had a comfortable victory, and already people are saying, yeah, he's got this title, and that's fair enough. It's a brilliant Adrian Newey car. Max Verstappen in the form of his life, and at the moment, to me, seems like he's on another level to everybody else. But for Aston Martin to be able to take the fight to Mercedes and Ferrari is going to take a lot. Because what Aston have that Mercedes and Ferrari don't is the fact that they're a customer team. And of course, there's been plenty of customer teams that have beat the works teams in seasons gone by. Even Racing Points were a brilliant outfit when we had the pink Mercedes in 2019. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, 2020. But this year, the chassis they have built on that Aston, with also Mercedes struggling with the concept of the car, they've stuck with this no side pod, and it just doesn't seem to be working. It all seems like if there's going to be any season for Aston to hold on to second place, at least in terms of the machinery they have available to them, this seems to be the car. And Fernando Alonso looks fired up and ready. He was so excited for that P3. Something I love at a Grand Prix, and I know lots of you do too, is at the end of the race, when the drivers jump out of the car. I'm not a big fan of the interviews they do at the end of the Grand Prix, but when they jump out of their car and they're celebrating, sometimes when you've had a dominant victory, drivers don't always do that. And Max does his traditional celebration. Nothing too crazy, just a bit of a fist bump, and that was it. But Fernando, you felt the emotion, didn't you? When he jumped out of the car and the fireworks behind him, it felt like he'd won the race. And I think that's partly because he's moved to a new team, partly because the expectation of this year's car, though it looked good in testing, I don't think anyone expected it to be as good as it eventually was in Bahrain, but also because it's the first time really since 2013 that Fernando's had a car that's been able to fight at the front, and he's ready for it. He has been through a lot, not just with Alpine, not just with McLaren, but also had that year out for IndyCar and the difficulty that held with the 2 Indy 500 runs he was able to do. Also, he did a season of WEC that was very, very successful, and so there was victories there, but on the level of Formula One, he's not had that even taste of. Again, he had that podium in Qatar, but I think that hunger for a real fight at the front with a car that's competitive over what should be the course of a season, that's what he's looking for, and that's what he's got this year, and that's why he and us viewers are so excited about the Aston Martin project this year. But there are challenges, and I think when you look at a team like Aston Martin that do not have the wealth of resources yet that Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull have, it's got to bring up question marks. Yes, they've got brilliant, incredible financial backing from Lance Stroll. And actually, the fact they finished so low down in the Constructors last season does give them that little bit of extra wind tunnel time. So that's going to come in handy for them. But do they have the experience within that team at fighting at the front? Yes, they're very long-standing and have great history in Formula One in the days of Jordan, Force India. But it's not quite on the level of your Ferraris, your Mercedes, and your Red Bull. They're not a world championship winning outfit. They're a multiple race winning team, but most teams are on the grid in current Formula One. They're a team that have always been underdogs, whether that again is in the Jordan days, Racing Point, Force India. They've always been able to punch above their weight, and that's something that experience, I think they will be able to carry through into this current season. But lacking that experience with Mike Crack as the team principal, is he going to be able to step up to the challenge? Their engineers, though they've made some brilliant hires during the off-season, are they ready to jump straight into not necessarily a title challenge? I think that's a step too far for Aston this year, but they're in that fight for second place. And so their direct competitors this year are going to be Ferrari and Mercedes. Are their engineers ready at the factory and at the track? Are they ready to make that step up to the title fight? And though I think Fernando is capable, and again, definitely is visible, has that hunger and desire to take the fight to Hamilton, Russell, Sainz and Leclerc, Lance strikes a big season for Lance Stroll. We all know he's most likely going to keep that seat for 2024, but is he able to be a consistent enough driver where, yes, Aston want him to be helping pick up points. Yes, they want him to be staying out of trouble. That's all great. And that, of course, is what makes a great Formula One driver. It's two of the key components of a great Formula One driver. But I think if Aston really want to be a proper contender for second place in the Constructors, they need Stroll to be a little bit more than that. Because when you're going up against Mercedes that have Hamilton and Russell, who last season were both excellent all year long, Ferrari have Charles Leclerc, a generational talent, and Carlos Sainz. It's hard to judge Carlos because last season was just okay. Scored that first pole and a second pole in the USA, but then also that first victory with that first pole in Silverstone. So he's a driver that knows how to drive, got countless podiums last year. But Sainz is still a very consistent driver. And actually, if Sainz can just refine that form of the McLaren days, he's going to be more than capable of picking up points every single weekend, again, just like we saw last season. So Stroll, yes, of course, his number one target, like any driver, is to match his teammates. But he needs to be doing more than that. He needs to be fending off your likes of George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Hamilton, Leclerc, even Sergio Perez. If the Red Bull's not quite suiting a particular circuit, we've only had data from Bahrain in testing and the first race, so it's still a completely open playing field on terms of where most cars are in the pecking order. But I'm just not sure Lance is there yet. He's one of the more experienced drivers on the grid, having raced for, 6 or 7 seasons in Formula 1. So he knows how to drive. It's just whether he's going to have that consistency week in, week out. It's something that has been there in the past, especially in the pink Mercedes era. That year, I feel it was 2020, that season, he was brilliant. And it was only at the end of the year, he started to have a bit of reliability and issues. There was that big brake failure, I think it was a tyre failure in Mugello when he was on for a podium fight. And his season kind of unravelled with 4 or 5 races to go. So we know it's in there. But I feel for Fernando to kick on, to be in the fight for third or even second, maybe a bit far, but third in the driver's title, he needs Stroll to be causing those headaches. Because otherwise, Stroll is going to be in a midfield fight. Fernando's going to be all on his own at the front. And I don't think, as good as Fernando is, and as good as that Aston looked in Bahrain, I think that would be a little bit too much for him to be able to fend off 4 drivers on his own without a teammate causing headaches through strategy and just being generally quick. Lance proved himself in Bahrain that even with his broken wrist, he can do it. He can be near the front. He can be causing headaches to those Mercedes. But over the course of the year, Lance needs to really build upon what he's been able to achieve over the last 2 years. He is still very young. Though he's one of the more experienced drivers, he still is one of the youngest drivers. He's such an enigma in Formula 1. But having Fernando as his teammate is going to go either one of 2 ways. Either he's going to be able to learn from him, like he did Sebastian Vettel, or he's going to clash. And so far, 1 race in, how much can you really tell? So far it looks okay. But for Aston to really kick on, to stay in second place, they need both drivers on the full attack. Their car looks good, but they're going to have to keep up reliability, of course, which seems okay after testing in the first race of the season. But also, they're going to have to keep developing that car. And the development race this year is going to be more important than ever. So do I think Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll could lead Aston Martin into second at the end of the season in the Constructors' Championship? Right now? Maybe. That is such a cop-out. That's such a cop-out. But with the might of Mercedes and Ferrari, it's going to be such an ask for Aston to beat them. And so on the balance, I still think Ferrari looked quick. I'm holding out that on a circuit that suits their car a bit more, they're going to be closer to Red Bull. So I think then the challenge becomes Mercedes and Aston, and then I think it's a flip of the coin. So second place, a little bit too far. But after that first race of the season, how good was it to see Fernando Alonso back in the fight in Formula 1? Fernando in the top 3 in the drivers, I think that is a possibility. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments section down below. Any feedback would be extremely useful. I'm still getting used to this brand new way of doing videos. Thank you very much for all of your support on the first one of the season. It's so good to be back. If you are new though, feel free to subscribe. Thank you all very much for watching. Hit that like button if you did enjoy. If you would like to ask any questions in the comments, I will try my best to see if we can bring back the weekly mailbox, a season classic on racing reviews, but that's in the pipeline. For now, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.